My name is Professor Peter Newman. I'm Director of the Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute. I am the MC for the day. This is a special event, and welcome to the inaugural Curtin Sustainability Lecture and Showcase. The showcase will be down the stairs there afterwards. I'd particularly like to acknowledge His Excellency Malcolm McCusker, who's the Governor of Western Australia, and thank him for allowing us to hold the event in your home. And it is delightful to see a full house today. We had a full house yesterday in Fremantle at an event where Professor Sachs talked about the end of extreme poverty. He spoke for an hour and 20 minutes and there wasn't a sound. It was a fantastic afternoon. We will have it available on our website, the CUSP website, if anyone wants to see that. Now, we are not alone. We are being videoed around the world. There's possibly 1,000 people watching this today. We have cameras simulcasting to 10 university campuses, including Vietnam, India, Brazil, China, as well as Curtin's own campuses, particularly the one in Singapore. A few housekeeping matters. Mobile phones, you know the drill. And when you exit down to the showcase, don't go exploring other doors because alarms will go off. The Dr. Richard Wally, OAM, is a Noongar elder, and he is going to provide for us a welcome to country. Welcome, Richard.
Kayawa, ngala wangin nunak ngala mort wangin pura wangin. Mama jenang nunak jenang ngala boja, nunak jenang wajak boja ngala mort boja. Mama jenang nunak wangin jenang karajan wangin. Baruan nunak wort kul nunak karak nunak boja, mama jenang nunak kayawa. Ngan yuat jenangan ngala karajan nunak ngan wort kul ngalangun balang bede. Balang wangin nunang Budawan Kayawa. I'd say, welcome, may the good spirit be with us. This is the land of Noongar, it's part of the Whadjuk language. The language I'm speaking is up some 40,000 years old. We still maintain our words and our connections to this land. I ask the good spirit to guide those who are providing messages today to articulate the message in such a way that we receive it, and those who take the message on to those who can put it into action. I also gave an apology, I cannot stay, I've got to go to another presentation, but I mentioned my ngun, my brother David Collard's here, and he can answer any question you like because he's as knowledgeable and as connected to this country as any of us. Just to make sure that it fits in with the program, Peter, so we get the program is correct and we're not telling people, false advertising in here. So I'll do a song for you and I'll finish up by doing an imitation of the didgeridoo without the didgeridoo. Kayawa. Maman jinang nuna kalaway ngala ngala kayaway maman jinang nuna gay wajak buja jinang nuna gay jinang nuna kayaway maman jinang nuna kwangin jay maman jinang nuna gay maman jinang nuna gay. Mama jenang nuna.
You've seen it first. I saw Richard perform in Los Angeles at the G'day USA event in front of 3,000 people. And there were a whole lot of film stars performing and Olivia Newton-John singing and people like that. And he was the star. You can see why. Richard was also a member of our Sustainability Roundtable, which was reporting to the Premier a few years ago. And I won't say anything more about that. We are in Government House, and sustainability has not gone away. And it's here to stay. And Jeffrey Sachs will certainly be telling us why that is the case. But before that, can I welcome His Excellency Malcolm McCusker.
Thank you very much, Peter. I don't propose to emulate Richard Wally and the didgeridoo. Professor Deborah Terry, the Vice-Chancellor of Curtin University, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Peter Newman, Curtin University Sustainable Policy Institute, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, I begin by respectfully acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and thank you again, Richard Wally, for your usual warm and informative and indeed entertaining welcome to country. It's my very great pleasure to open Curtin's inaugural Sustainable Development Lecture this afternoon, to be delivered by such an esteemed speaker as Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs is, amongst other things, the Director of the Earth Institute of Columbia University, Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon on the development of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals to replace the Millennium Development Goals by 2015, at least we hope that's so. Curtin University's Australian Sustainable Development was officially launched 5 years ago, and I was very glad to accept initial membership of its board before I became governor, as, like any sensible person, I have a keen interest in the subject of sustainable development. In an article in the Australian newspaper in January this year by a journalist, Nick Cater, he said it is difficult to define exactly what sustainability means. And he referred to Wikipedia, which didn't seem to know either, as it's being applied, he said, to a wide range of subjects, sometimes misapplied. He also suggested that sustainability is Malthusianism, Professor Malthus, for the 21st century, the fallacy that population is growing faster than available resources and ruination is just round the corner. And he derided that sustainability as he defined it, pointing out that in 1990 the World Hunger Project calculated that the ecosystem could sustain support only 6 million people, and then only if they lived on a vegetarian diet, but that more than 2 decades later, with a world population of 7.1 billion, global production had substantially increased, and there were, he says, 170 million fewer malnourished people than there were in 1990, according to the World Food Programme. But that author, in so defining and impliedly deriding sustainability, fails to grasp its true meaning, which is both common sense and, in a way, simple. So seek sustainability means identifying either existing issues or issues foreseeable, and taking steps in advance to deal with them. Failure to do that and to deride those who work in the cause of sustainability is to invite a dangerous complacency. The commonly used Australian phrase, "she'll be right," is a message that should be immediately rejected. She won't be right unless problems existing or in the future are addressed. There are many challenges for those facing those who seek sustainability in the world today. A major one, as we all know, is climate change, bringing with it the related problems of diminishing water supply and diminishing food production. Due to great foresight and planning in the state, desalination here has reduced anxiety about a potable water supply being available for our ever-growing population, forecast to reach 3 million by 2050, which probably to Professor Sachs sounds exceedingly small and significant. However, very low rainfalls that have occurred in past years, although happily not the last year, have made the continuance in farming in our eastern wheat belt increasingly problematic. Some farmers, indeed, have already been forced to walk off their properties. Furthermore, the amount of arable land available both in Australia and the rest of the world has been reducing year after year with increased urbanisation and salination. The challenge is to increase food production for a growing population on a reduced supply of arable land. I understand that Curtin University is considering agricultural production in the Pilbara as well as the Kimberleys, where water supply is abundant. The terms food security and water security have come into greater usage in the last decade, and that reflects a growing concern which can only be met by innovation. This challenge can be met by research and innovation, as I say, and Curtin University is to be congratulated for recently establishing at Curtin a centre aimed at increasing cereal production by breeding new cereal grains resistant to diseases and pests, which still savagely reduce the size of crops in some years. I've had agricultural interests in the state for some 50 years, and I'm therefore aware of how important science is and research for that industry, an industry which in Western Australia is extremely important and worth more than $7 billion annually to this state. Another important sustainability issue is energy. Considerable advances have been made in the production of alternative, as a source of power, alternative that is to coal and oil, such as solar, wind, waves, nuclear, all of them being essentially renewable and clean. All of them have their problems. Nuclear, for example, has a problem, I think, with emotional reaction or distaste by large parts of the population. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that in the speech to come. High on the list of priorities for the United Nations Sustainability Goals is the reduction of carbon emissions or sequestration of carbon in a safe and secure manner. And that's something which again is being addressed at the Curtin University Institute. There are many problems in the world, and to ignore them will not make them go away. But there are challenges that I'm confident that can successfully be met through the admirable work of researchers such as those at Curtin University Institute of Sustainable Development. Australia is blessed with researchers of a very high standard of excellence. Just over a week ago now, I attended a presentation by 12 gifted and very earnest young Australian scientists competing in what is called the International Fame Lab. Scientific research is essential if our civilization is to prosper, and indeed that means scientific education of our youth. I mentioned earlier solar power as being one area of research, and there's no doubt its efficiency has radically improved over the years. For example, I recently had a solar-powered pump installed, which at a very low cost comparatively replaced a diesel-powered pump, which was very expensive to run and high costs of maintenance. The comparatively cheap solar pump had no running costs and almost no maintenance costs, and I think that's the way of the future. Relevant to that, however, at the Fame Lab function that I attended, one young scientist whose field of science is physics has found that the efficiency of solar panels can be very significantly increased by a factor of 4 by the use of what he describes as miniature versions of Buddhist singing bowls. I repeat, Buddhist singing bowls. An idea that when he was asked how did he get onto that, he said a friend of mine came back with a couple of singing bowls, and I started to think, what could they be used for? He said in the same way that Buddhist bowls resonate with sound, nano bowls resonate with light. So it just illustrates there are many scientific minds focusing on the various forms of energy, replacing coal and oil, at least, if not replacing them, substantially diminishing our reliance upon them. So I'd congratulate Curtin for organising this inaugural lecture, which I'm now pleased to officially declare open. I look forward with great interest to what flows from these proceedings, and I do hope that they may translate and inspire positive action and leadership outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Malcolm, for your leadership in this area over the time of your office, which is drawing to a close, and you've really set the bar quite high, and we thank you indeed for that. We have a new leader at Curtin University, a new Vice-Chancellor, who the other day, when they were dividing up who was going to have responsibility for the 4 core areas in the university, one of which is sustainable development, she said, yes, I will be the sustainability champion. So we are very pleased to welcome Professor Deborah Terry to tell us a little bit about sustainability at Curtin.
Thank you very much, Peter, and I too would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, who are the traditional custodians of this land upon which we meet, and I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and although Richard's not here, I'd like to just record my thanks for his wonderful welcome to country. And I'd also like to especially welcome the following: Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, His Excellency the Governor of Western Australia, Malcolm McCusker, Professor Peter Newman, John Curtin, Distinguished Professor of Sustainability, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, both here and at all of the campuses that are accessing the live streaming of this afternoon's lecture. And can I just add that everybody, both here and elsewhere, is welcome to join in the conversation this afternoon on Twitter, #SachsSD. Now, I've just got a few minutes to make a few brief comments, obviously, before we hear from Professor Sachs. But I'd just like to say that Curtin is deeply honoured to have Professor Sachs as the guest speaker for its inaugural Sustainability Development Lecture. Professor Newman will shortly introduce Professor Sachs formally, but can I say that we were absolutely delighted that he accepted our invitation to present, and on a personal level, it's been a privilege for me to be able to have the opportunity to spend some time with Professor Sachs over the last couple of days, and I've been incredibly impressed with his energy and his stamina, and I'm sure he will present us with a very thought-provoking lecture this afternoon. Professor Sachs's capacity to perform so effectively as a leading academic scholar on economic development, at the same time as being so committed to having a genuine impact in relation to the immense challenges facing the globe, is enormously impressive. His role in relation to the progress that has been made in relation to the UN's Millennium Development Goals has been absolutely pivotal, as is his role both as the Director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and in relation to the development of the new Sustainable Development Goals. And at the university level, he also has a major role. He's Director of the Earth Institute of Columbia University, and in this role he's having a tremendous impact through his leadership of what is essential in this area, a genuinely multidisciplinary institute that is focused on research, on education and on practical solutions. The Earth Institute brings together around 850 academics and researchers from a wide range of different disciplines, all working together on sustainable development. Since taking up my role in February, I've been very impressed with how embedded the commitment to sustainability is across Curtin University. So like Columbia University, this is an area that we are very focused on. Around a quarter of our research income and our research output relates to this broad field. And with the assistance of both government and industry, Curtin supports a number of institutes and centres that are engaged in sustainability research and sustainability education. Sustainability thinking is also woven into the way in which we manage our campuses and our physical infrastructure, and it's a strong focus of our teaching programs and a perspective that we aim to ensure that characterises our graduates' approach to their chosen professions, whatever that profession is. As the Governor's indicated, with the world facing increasingly complex and pressing challenges in terms of sustainable development, the higher education and research sectors have an absolute obligation to respond. And I can assure you at Curtin University we are absolutely committed to meeting that obligation. So what we want to do now is to show you a brief presentation that captures some of what's happening in sustainability at Curtin, and then obviously after this lecture there'll be the opportunity to go downstairs and see a bit of a showcase as to what's happening at Curtin University. Thank you very much.
The Australian Sustainable Development Institute's role is to bring people together from across the university, from communities, from industry, to tackle some of the serious issues that face society and to come up with real solutions that then can be implemented. Take unconventional gas. This is a potentially low carbon fuel source that everybody seems to hate. We can bring industry, government, researchers together around a table to actually have a look at the issues, research and discover the facts, and then promote a debate around facts rather than around fear. Take climate change, for instance. We can no longer plan on what climate has been in the past. We have to plan on what it's likely to be in the future. We have to build our society based on what the future might be like. A really exciting emerging field of research is around biomimicry. This is design inspired by nature. Nature's very good at producing things that use minimal amount of water, energy, produce no waste, create diversity. Nature's been around for 3.8 billion years, and I think there's an enormous amount we can learn. Other work we're doing around regenerative cities, cities that actually are part of the solution to a sustainable society rather than being part of a problem. These are real cutting-edge, quality bits of research that will have a huge impact. I think the enduring legacy of the Institute will be our children, our grandchildren will sit there and say, thank heaven someone had the courage to start investing in research around quality of life and making tomorrow better.
The Sustainable Built Environment National Research Centre is a unique blend of industry, government and research partners who come together delivering applied research for Australian industry. Our centre's research is structured along three streams: the triple bottom line sustainability, environmental, social and economic. We call the first one greening the built environment. It's about less water, less energy, lower costs in buildings and infrastructure. The second program we call people, processes and procurement. For example, it's about looking at social policy around housing and looking at the impacts of fly-in, fly-out workers on the workplace and their families. And the third area, economic, we call it productivity, driving productivity through innovation. The centre brings together an integrated view between our partners that provide value on projects like this, the $1.2 billion Perth Children's Hospital, where we're looking at building information modelling, or BIM, in integrating design with optimising construction with lowering the long-term asset costs. It brings together a better hospital at lower cost. We're governed by an industry-dominated board, a board that determines the strategic direction of the centre, made up of our private sector partners, our government partners, and of course our research partners. And I can assure you that the board members let me know if they're not getting value for money. I'm delighted to say that the enduring legacy of this centre are the personal relationships and the long-term respect that researchers have gained over the past decade or so. What we're seeing now in today's hard-headed world of business is that researchers have a place at the head table in business, and that's good for Australia.
Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute, or CUSP, is one of the new ways of trying to solve problems across the disciplines. CUSP has nearly 70 PhD students, which puts us amongst the biggest in the world in this area. And we attract people who are professionals, practitioners, people who want to change the world. And we ask them always, who is going to benefit
from this PhD you're doing. We start with the problems. We don't want to start with theories. We end up using theories, but we're actually solving the problems that we're faced with. We have work that we're doing on climate change adaptation. We're doing this in the southwest as communities need to prepare for the big storms that are coming. We have work on green innovation in China. How can China lead the world, as it must do, in becoming clean and green? And the work that I'm doing is on railways and how to build them and how to get the finance for them. And we're doing detailed modelling and calculations that show you could pay for a railway out of the increase in value around stations. So that's a pretty good message that most treasuries want to hear, and politicians. And we're doing this in Perth, but we're also doing it in India and in Myanmar. The legacy of CUSP, I believe, will be a whole series of people who are solving problems that before were put aside, because they've got skills that cut across the disciplines, they've got the passion to do it, and most of all, they've got the hope that what they do will really matter.
I would like to start with a very simple fact. It is believed that the building an LNG facility costs about 20 to 30% more in this country than in North America. It is not economically sustainable, and we have to find ways to drive down the costs and improve the productivities. Construction process, at some extent, can be regarded as the information management process. This is especially true for the mega projects, such as LNG facilities. And one of the concerns in our BIM Center is to see how information can be effectively managed throughout the entire life cycle of the project, all the way from design engineering to construction and eventually to operation and maintenance. An example of how we are making industry impact right now is Woodside Smart LNG tag. The smart tag is not ordinary tag. It's a tag that can be integrated with advanced technologies such as virtual and augmented reality. This technology is a breakthrough technology, and with the smart tag, each component can actually speak for itself. So we can create a smart construction site. Project Echo is the center's flagship project. It was initiated by Woodside. It's a collaborative project between Curtin, Woodside, government, and over 20 different industry partners, and all coming to Curtin with the ultimate goal to enhance the technology-enabled productivity for the entire industry. Not just benefiting oil and gas industry, our research can provide flow-on benefits into mining and infrastructure sectors. So far, we have had huge success in front-end research and innovation, and we're going to continue the success into the implementation.
It's time for the main event. Professor Jeffrey Sachs has been introduced, really. There are few public academics, none as powerful and as significant as Jeffrey Sachs, and it's a great pleasure to welcome him today.
Well, back here. Governor McCusker and Vice-Chancellor and Professor Peter Newman, and ladies and gentlemen, let me say what a thrill and delight and absolute pleasure it is to be in Perth with you in the last couple of days and to get to know many wonderful people and great thinkers in this area. I think the video we just saw is extremely inspiring and very, very impressive. For me, I was so taken. It's very much like the last line of Casablanca for me. Louis, this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship. I think the Earth Institute and Curtin University and many leaders in this community, we have a lot of fun things to do together. and a lot of very exciting things to do together. And I feel very, very privileged to have a chance to speak with you about the opportunities and the challenges that we face, and especially now, because we're in a moment of history that's going to matter. And maybe a subtitle of my talk, which I just learned a moment ago from the governor, is "She'll be right, mate, if we try, but she'll be very wrong if we don't try." We're really at a crossroads. We've been losing a lot of time, actually, ladies and gentlemen, over the past 42 years. 42 years ago, we had the first global meeting in history on climate and development in Stockholm. We had the publication of a very important book that year called Limits to Growth, which was the first attempt of system science to grapple with the combination of economic development and a finite planet and a threatened environment. And while that specific model had a lot wrong, it had a crucial message that's right, which is that there is an issue, a challenge, a problem, and we've lost a lot of time in facing it. And so my message today is really one of urgency, most of all. During the next year and a half, as I'll describe in the next few minutes, we aim globally in the United Nations context to negotiate two pivotal steps forward. One, to set goals on sustainable development that are clear and robust and understandable by the entire human community. And second, to reach a year from this December a new and vitally important agreement on climate change. So we have a heavy lift and we have a real job to do. And the time is short, but the spirits are high, and so let's get to it. I'll start with the hero of my youth, President John F. Kennedy, who in his inaugural address said something very important and very true for us today. He said, "For man holds in his mortal hands the ability to end all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." That is really the paradox of our time. We are heirs to an incredible wealth of scientific and technological knowledge, completely breathtaking and advancing at a dramatic rate, as you just saw in the video. We can do wonderful things. It is literally within our reach to end extreme poverty in this generation. Indeed, we've already had not a bad go of it in the last 20 years. But it's also quite true, as it was for President Kennedy, thinking of the thermonuclear issue in 1961. And today we think of the environmental challenge. It's possible for us to ruin everything. And technology, as it has been throughout history, is always double-edged. It gives us more capacity. It doesn't determine right from wrong. It doesn't determine by itself whether that technology is properly used or used in an entirely destructive way. And so the challenge really is whether we choose the path of ending all forms of human poverty and paths of human enrichment which are within our reach, or whether we are going to continue, as we are continuing, down a path of self-destruction in many ways. Can we succeed in making the best of the knowledge we have and in benefiting from our prosperity, or are we so short-sighted and so blinded and confused that we're going to let it pass through our fingers and bequeath a much more dangerous world to our children. I'm always reminded when I think about this paradox of the way that Professor E.O. Wilson, who's my guru, the great biologist at Harvard University, put it when he kindly wrote a foreword to a book of mine a few years ago. He said that humanity has stumbled into the 21st century with its ancient emotional baggage, its medieval institutions, and its near godlike technology. We have a struggle to make these different time horizons work. Our human nature, built on the savanna here and in the savanna of Africa tens of thousands of years ago, our institutions, which we venerate in some ways, which are also outdated in many ways, and our technologies and the opportunities and the urgent challenges that they present. This really is the essence of what sustainable development is. We are, in our own time, the beneficiaries of one of the most remarkable scientific and technological revolutions ever, perhaps the one that is proceeding the fastest in all of human history. And that, of course, is the digital revolution or the information revolution that began in the 1930s with the theory of modern computation, with the first computers in the 1940s, and then with the integrated circuit in 1957. And what is shown in this graph is what's called Moore's Law, the idea that integrated circuits have been improving in capacity essentially every 18 to 24 months since they were first invented in 1957. And this law was not a law when it was first articulated by the then CEO of Intel, Gordon Moore, in 1965, who looked back at the first 8 years of integrated circuitry and noted that every 18 to 24 months, the number of transistors that Intel had been able to put on a chip had doubled. And when Gordon Moore wrote about it, that was 5 doublings, or 2 to the 5th power, about a 32-time improvement of capacity of these early integrated circuits. He said that we'd have another 10-year headroom at least for this, so he envisioned another 5 doublings or so. But what has in fact been the case, and it has made our world economy as it is today, that since 1965, we are now 49 years onward, we've had another 25 doublings. And Moore's Law has continued till today, and the industry leaders tell us there's another 10 to 15 years of headroom ahead of further doublings. So we now have, in Intel's latest chip, 5 billion transistors in what was 2 the first time. We have had a billion-fold improvement in the capacity to process, store, and transmit data. And this is changing the world economy, obviously. It's changing our daily lives at a rate that is unimaginable. It is giving real life to President Kennedy's insight, which is that we hold within our mortal hands the ability to end extreme poverty. It makes it very real and very tangible. And it is enabling every other branch of science to benefit, because fundamentally the bits and bytes that can now be manipulated and transmitted can change biological sciences, material sciences, of course business management practices, agronomy, and every energy systems and every other area of concern. This is another example of a super Moore's Law. The vertical axis is logarithmic, so each of those steps is a multiple of 10 10,000, 100,000, million, 10 million, 100 million. And what this is graphing from 2001 to 2013 is the price of sequencing a human genome, which in 2001 cost $100 million for the human genome. What's interesting is that at that time, the US National Institutes of Health brought together a group of leading biologists and asked what should be the goal in the area of genomic sequencing. Dream, the blue sky dream. And they said that the goal should be to bring down the cost of the sequencing down to $1,000 because that would bring it within reach of personalized medicine and tremendous benefits for every area of biological science and human health. And NIH, in this case, did absolutely the right thing. It created a large-scale program. It gave grants on a competitive science basis to leading genome sequencing scientific groups, and they beat Moore's Law and actually achieved the goal, because this year the cost is falling from $100 million 13 years ago to $1,000 now. Moore's Law is that straight white line, straight line because this is a semi-logarithmic graph. So these are equal proportionate steps down. And you can see that the cost of the genome sequencing has been even faster than the revolution of information technology. It gives a sense of what we can do. And you saw in the video just a few minutes ago many places where photovoltaics can now be deployed. And this too isn't advancing at the rate of Moore's Law. It's called Swanson's Law. This time around, it's a doubling, for every doubling of installed capacity of PV, there's been roughly a 20% reduction of cost. And since 1977, that has meant a 100-fold reduction of the cost of a 1-watt solar cell, from about $77 per watt in 1977 to just 70 cents a watt now. This makes it feasible to envision universal access to modern power for the more than 1 billion people who still do not have electricity on the planet. And not having electricity on the planet is not a matter of inconvenience. It is literally a matter of life and death. There are not cold chains for antibiotics. There is not refrigeration for food. There's not proper safety. There's not pumps for irrigation without electricity in many remote regions. But now, because of the advances in photovoltaics, it's possible to envision universal access to safe, clean, modern energy sources and a much deeper transformation of the world energy system, which I'll come back to shortly. And the fact of the matter is that it's adding up to something quite real. It brings realistically the idea that extreme poverty, which I call loosely the poverty that kills, and it kills in large numbers, within reach of its final end. Extreme poverty is measured conventionally by the World Bank in a not so precise way, I would say, or a falsely precise way, according to an income line for households of $1.25 per person per day, measured at international prices, to put it in shorthand. And by that World Bank standard, in 1990, roughly 43% of households in the developing countries, that is 6/7 of the world's population, still lived under that minimum line. By 2010, which is the most recent year, unfortunately, that the World Bank has produced this number in the aggregate, so we don't have the more recent data, that share of households had declined to 21%. there had been a halving of the so-called headcount poverty rate in developing countries between 1990 and 2010. This means that in the aggregate of the developing world, the first Millennium Development Goal, which was to cut by half the poverty rate by the year 2015, was actually achieved 5 years ahead of time. Mind you, not in every country, because the predominant force for this improvement was, of course, China's development, the most remarkable and rapid in world history. But this kind of reduction of poverty is being seen in every region of the world, including in sub-Saharan Africa. Though in sub-Saharan Africa, the poverty rate as a whole still is probably, at this point, around 40 to 45% headcount poverty when the World Bank gets to the next round of the data. But it makes it realistic to think about the actual end of extreme poverty, and the World Bank Development Committee, which is the guiding policy committee of that institution, and a fairly conservative one at that, mind you, because it's chaired by, it's occupied by ministers of finance and economy from around the world, voted last year officially for a 2030 target to end extreme poverty. So we're getting somewhere. Now, we're also getting to the end of the good news, because I have to give you some bad news also. Because as President Kennedy said, it's a choice. It's not an inevitability. She'll be right, maybe, if we choose to make it happen. Because in the midst of all of this economic development, there are two other phenomena of striking reality as well that are not so happy. The first is a dramatic widening of inequality around the world. In my country, we have become as divided as at any time we know of in American history. And this phenomenon is occurring in many places in the world. The middle class is disappearing. A lucky few are becoming phenomenally wealthy, and many are falling into poverty or near poverty. And youth around the world are finding it extremely difficult to find jobs, especially as technology leads to upheavals in the labor market. And it has been the case in almost every place that I've stepped foot in the last 3 years, and for a while I was taking it personally, but now I understand it's not me arriving someplace, but it is the fact of a global phenomenon. There have been crowds of youth out in the streets fighting police. There is a governance crisis worldwide. There is a social crisis worldwide. And even in places where it just seems to simmer or not even simmer, it's lurking and it's real. And often the people at the top are not very aware of it. But all over the world, we're seeing this kind of profound governance crisis that has its roots in people who are displaced, who are poor, who are failing to find a foothold in a dramatically changing global economy. In China, the measure of inequality has soared. As an example, I was in Beijing just a couple of days ago listening to Professor Li Shi of Beijing Normal University discuss this curve, which is the rise of the so-called Gini coefficient, the standard measure of inequality across households in China. But of course, I found it compelling that that curve looks a lot like that curve. That's the Gini coefficient in the United States during the same period. We are both economies seeing this dramatic, unprecedented widening of inequality. And it is poverty at the bottom, and it is wealth beyond belief at the top. And of course, it is being dangerously amplified by a political system that increasingly caters only to the top and doesn't even recognize those at the bottom. The most recent research in the United States, really remarkable political science research, by the way, by Professor Martin Gillens at Princeton University in a book called Affluence and Influence, studied how various public policy issues have been resolved in the US in the past 20 years. And what he did was very clever. For each issue, he looked at how class or income gradient affected positions on the issue, and then tracked how the issues were resolved over time. Turns out that the only attitudes of public opinion that matter in the United States are the top decile. The bottom 90% views in opinion surveys have no relationship whatsoever to the policy outcomes in the US. And we feel it because our public policy is not related to the so-called median voter. Our public policy is driven by the voter at the top of the income distribution, and that is dangerously amplifying these inequalities. That's why sustainable development deals with social inclusion as the second fundamental pillar following fighting poverty and spreading economic well-being. Social inclusion is not simply a nice idea or a nice goal. It is vital for our societies to hold together. And many places in the world are absolutely not holding together or are at risk of coming completely unstuck. Now, we have one more big problem, and that is the third of the pillars of sustainable development. That's our finite planet. And to understand our finite planet, one needs to take a step back, as I had a chance to discuss in detail yesterday, at the economic history of our time. That Moore's Law phenomenon of the doubling of the transistor count every 2 years, and how that has propelled the economy of the world in the last 40 or 50 years and reshaped the world economy, is really a phenomenon that began with the Industrial Revolution itself. And one goes back almost to the exact founding of Australia as a colony of Britain, to the American Revolution, and to the start of the Industrial Revolution. It all happened almost on exactly the same date. I find 1776 to be the pivotal year of modern history. It's a date we learn in school for the wrong reason. We're taught something about the Declaration of Independence in the United States. Not a bad document. A little bit peculiar in some ways, I might add. But it's also the date, even more importantly, that James Watt patented the steam engine. It's also a date dear to my own heart because it's the date that Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. And for those who want the broad historical view, it's also the date that Edward Gibbon published The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It was a busy year, a lot of good writing, and one pivotal transformation, the steam engine. And the steam engine, of course, helped make Australia, and Australian coal helped make the world economy as well as the Australian economy. But it was the invention of the steam engine and the ability to tap into fossil fuels for the first time for motive force that changed the world economy in the most fundamental way. And what happened is shown by this curve that also looks a lot like Moore's Law. This is a reconstruction, imperfect but useful, of an estimate of output per person, national income per person, but this is world income per person, stretching back to the beginning of the modern era in 1 AD, made by a great late macro historian, Angus Maddison. And he reconstructed this on a simple basis that throughout almost all of human history, people were farmers living at subsistence. And we know that the urban population in the world was always under 10% of the world population until the modern era. And one can see that the world economy as a whole, as best one can understand it, actually had very slight technological change for 1,800 years. And then with Watt and all that followed came this remarkable process of geometric growth, the Moore's law in and of itself, not at the rate of semiconductors, at a rate of, in the US, which has been the leading economy almost since the start, at about 1.7% per year. It doesn't sound like all that much, but it means a doubling time of 40 years. And if you do that for 2 centuries, you also get 2 to the 5th or 32-fold increase of output per capita. And if you do that together with a growth of the world population of nearly 10 times since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you have a world economy in the aggregate that's expanded about 250 times. Quite remarkable for us, Homo sapiens sapiens. But the one thing that hasn't expanded 250 times is Earth. The Earth has remained a finite system, and a 250-fold expansion of human activity globally, roughly 25 times or 30 times per person, roughly 10 times in population. It's actually a 9-fold increase of population since Thomas Robert Malthus wrote about this question in 1798, has put unprecedented pressure on the physical earth. This is our reality. It's a reality different from every preceding generation. And it's come on us at such a fast pace, not like Moore's law, but generation by generation, that we still do not recognize it, and we still do not have political institutions, a mindset, or a strategy to address it properly. If I go back to the wonderful opening of Limits to Growth in 1972, which was the first modern text on this challenge, it famously introduced a parable of the lily pads on the pond. And it said, imagine a pond where the lily pads are doubling in the surface area that they cover every day. And in exactly 30 days, they entirely cover the pond. And it asked us to think about that, because you realize that in the 29th day, half the pond is still uncovered by lily pads. And in the 28th day, 3/4 uncovered, only 1/4 covered. And in the 27th day, only 12.5% covered. And in the 26th day, only 6.25% covered. And the point is that suppose you're warned that the pond is going to be completely overtaken by lily pads the first day of the month. And you observe, and you observe, and you observe, and you say, nothing's happening. And you get to the 10th day, and it's some tiny corner. You say, don't worry about it. The 15th day, the 20th day, the 25th day, and it's 6%. And you say, don't worry. And then, in the blink of an eye, the pond is lost. And that's where we are, because we have arrived on the 29th day. It's just our fate. Our fate could have been different. We could have been born in 1776, faced a different set of problems, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Or in 1972, that generation first heard about this. It was 2 generations away from reaching the end. But for us, we've reached it. But you wouldn't know it from the newspapers, would you? You wouldn't exactly know it from Mr. Murdoch's media, would you? Every day, Mr. Murdoch tells us in the United States, in the Wall Street Journal and in Fox News, that's a hoax. A heck of a lot of nerve, by the way. Pure propaganda, pure anti-science, pure immorality as far as I'm concerned, and pure danger for us. Because the reality is we are now with our backs against the wall. The most important concept in recent years, actually there are two important concepts I want to share. One, without a slide, is the phrase that was introduced by Nobel laureate Paul Crutzen, the Anthropocene. This is a neologism based on Greek, anthropos, human, scene, meaning epoch, geologic epoch. In formal geologic terms, we live in the Holocene, in the post-Ice Age following the Pleistocene. The Holocene began around 10,000 years before the present. Between 17,000 and 10,000 was the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. But Professor Crutzen, who won the Nobel Prize for being one of the three scientists to discover the ozone depletion effect, said about 10 years ago, we've entered a new epoch on the planet, one in which humanity is forcing the fundamental changes to the Earth's physical systems. For the first time in the planetary history, one species is dominating Earth physical process change, humanity. And the scientists say we're driving the change. I say we're drunk driving the change. We don't even have a clue we're driving the change. Some ecologists 5 years ago, led by Professor Johan Rockström of the Stockholm Resiliency Center, created a second concept called planetary boundaries. They worked together to identify the real threat points for our time, the places where that near vertical growth of the world economy is now colliding with the Earth's physical systems, and in particular is at risk or already has passed thresholds in which great destabilization of Earth's processes will take place. And they created this idea of 10 planetary boundaries at risk. And at noon, at north, at 12 noon is climate change, which is by far the most important of all of them, because it affects all of the rest and because it is completely out of control right now. Next, ocean acidification. This is the phenomenon that because of the heavy loading of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere due to fossil fuel use, that carbon dioxide is dissolving in the ocean sea surface, and when CO2 dissolves in water, creates carbonic acid. The pH of the ocean has already fallen by 0.1 unit, which means an increase of acidification of 10 to the 0.1 or 30%, which means that the shellfish and the plankton that are calcareous with a calcium shell, the mollusks, the other marine life of exoskeletons are all, and coral reefs, of which this country is host to the greatest in the world, are all under profound threat. And the ocean acidification is proceeding at a dramatic rate. Ozone depletion, I don't think I have a pointer here. Nitrogen and phosphorus flux from massive fertilizer use. Depletion of fresh water, which this part of Australia knows a lot about and is addressed with insight. Change of land use, deforestation, massive overlogging of some of the neighboring countries in this region, Indonesia, Malaysia, with this incredible demand for tropical hardwoods and other products in China. The profound loss of biodiversity leading to what has been called the sixth great extinction of the planet. Massive aerosol loadings with massive smog and pollutants claiming many years of life expectancy in many of the cities of the world, and massive chemical pollution are the planetary boundaries that have been identified. The most important of all of these, because of the profound effects that it will have on every part of the biosphere and the other Earth systems, is the carbon dioxide loading and the other greenhouse gas loadings. I'm sure you're aware that this year, for the first time, we had an entire month in which CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere were at 400 parts per million. This is the first time in 3 million years that carbon dioxide has been so high. And as my colleague, Professor James Hansen, who for 30 years was the US government's lead climate scientist, has shown in compelling research, every time the Earth has had this level of carbon dioxide loading in its long history, ocean levels have been several meters higher than they are today. Professor Hansen concludes that we've already set in motion a process that, when all of the feedbacks work themselves through, will lose a significant portion of the West Antarctic ice sheet, and perhaps a significant proportion of the Greenland ice sheet as well, raising ocean levels many meters. Of course, when this was true 50 million or 100 million years ago, we didn't have Manhattan or Perth or Los Angeles or the dozens of major cities around the world sitting at the ports, which is a wonderful place for cities to sit, except if the ocean level starts to rise by several meters. We learned in New York that just a rise of 1/3 of a meter over a century can be pretty devastating when it's combined with a massive storm, as we had in 2012, because we had unprecedented storm surges. This is New York's finest, the New York Police Department, floating down 10th Street in Lower Manhattan on the first night of the storm. Every major hospital in Lower Manhattan was knocked out. You can imagine what we consider one of the most sophisticated cities in the world had not remembered to take the backup generators out of the basements. We don't think very clearly, ladies and gentlemen. We're not exactly on top of the game, and we shouldn't pretend that we are. Events are changing a lot faster than our institutions, our knowledge, our procedures, our care to look at this. This is Beijing in January, perhaps a historic moment for China, because it was both an eye closer and an eye opener. You couldn't open your eyes. The best advice during these smoggy days in Beijing was stop breathing for the next week, because this was something like 30 times higher than the WHO safe thresholds for PM 2.5 particulates. And this is a repeated occurrence. It was an eye-opener to China's leadership, because environmental crises can be crises of profound political destabilization as well. Look at Chernobyl. It was the start of the unraveling of the Soviet Union. I think the Chinese leadership has taken some notice that they're facing an environmental calamity. And the research is suggesting more than 5 years lost of life expectancy in northern China in the heavily coal-impacted areas. This is a drought being experienced in São Paulo state of Brazil, where I was a couple of weeks ago, now I guess about a month ago. Notably, the government had sounded no alarm. They said, quiet, we have the World Cup coming up. Not to tell people we're running out of water. And what they're going to do afterwards, I don't know, because then they're going to have an election coming up. And the government doesn't know what to do. The reservoirs are drying up. We have the same phenomenon in California right now, hit by one of the worst droughts in our modern history, and exactly the kind of drought that one expects to become a prolonged, recurrent phenomenon in a world of human-induced climate change. Currently, there's massive drought in Indonesia. This is a picture from March in Sumatra, And this is what it means, nitrogen flux. When the nitrogen and phosphorus from the fertilizers flow into the rivers, percolate into the groundwater, and end up in the estuaries. I also use this as a picture of bad parenting. Do not put your child into an algal bloom. Not a good idea. A lot of nutrients there. Not a great place for a swim. And absolutely alarming because the coastal China is seeing this kind of phenomenon at unprecedented rates. The estimates now are about 150 major estuaries around the world, including the Gulf of Mexico in the delta of the Mississippi River, with massive dead zones which follow these algal blooms. And of course, extreme storms such as in Sichuan province, and the strongest landfalling typhoon in measurement history, Typhoon Haiyan, which struck the Philippines and devastated large areas and left vast numbers of people still displaced, of course, many, many months after this calamity. And it's notable that in many cases, these shocks, like the mega drought that hit Syria for 10 years, end up in open conflict. This is something, again, our policymakers fail to understand. When conflict breaks out, they view it in strategic or geopolitical terms, not in ecological terms. But ecological catastrophe leads to social and political catastrophe. There was massive internal migration and displacement in Syria for many years. It was a tinder which struck fire just with the so-called Arab Spring in 2011. And since then, of course, the outside powers, as they always do, came in and greatly amplified the violence, and more than 130,000 Syrians have been dead in what the United States and Iran and Russia and Saudi Arabia consider their latest great game. But it's, of course, a devastation for the people, and none of the outside powers is doing a thing actually addressed to the well-being of the people in Syria stuck in the middle. And of course, you know it well, this country is extraordinarily vulnerable to climate change. This is a mass drylands country. This is a country dependent on its agriculture. This is a country of immense and unique biodiversity. And it's not surprising that in many parts of this country, the vulnerabilities are extraordinarily high, whether it's to drought and forest fire, as in Western Australia, or massive flooding in Queensland, or to the massive heat waves that we watched as the players were collapsing in the Australian Open earlier this year. You'd think some prime minister might notice. You'd kind of think it, right? But then again, you'd think some president might notice it, or someone else. This is really the oddest disconnect of the planet. So, here's the grim reality. The grim reality is that we have squandered our time. We've squandered the warnings. 22 years ago, that was 20 years after the Stockholm Summit, the world met at what was the apogee of the global environmental movement at the Rio Earth Summit. And at that summit, world leaders from all over the world, even a Republican Party president of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush Sr., went to the conference and signed 3 treaties, 3 really important, well-drafted, well-reasoned treaties. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. These are excellent treaties, well worth teaching to your students year in and year out. But 20 years on, when the world met as the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit, Nature magazine, the premier scientific journal, weekly in the world gave a report card to those 3 treaties, and it gave them 3 Fs. Not one of the treaties has been implemented, not one of them. And the United States, in its infinite lack of wisdom, which it displays to glowing proportions more and more every year, wouldn't even ratify the Convention on Biological Diversity because Newt Gingrich, one of our most expendable politicians of modern life, convinced the Congress that private property means the right to endangered species on your land. And don't let the United Nations tell you otherwise. So we face the 6th extinction. We're not even party to the Convention on Biological Diversity in the United States. So Rio Plus 20 in June 2012 was a little bit of a grim occasion, and this time around a Democratic Party president, ostensibly the party of conservation and environmental attention, didn't even dare go to the conference, much less sign a treaty, because it's dangerous politics to be associated with the UN. I partly thank Rupert for that, because of the vilification of multilateralism that is core to the message of his media. And so Obama stayed away, and what the conferees came up with was something that I think we need to hold on to, even though it's not necessarily the most robust thing in the world that we could want. But they came up with the idea of adopting goals that every one of us could aspire to, not just legal drafts for the diplomats and the lawyers. And so they came to the idea of emulating the Millennium Development Goals, which have had some traction, not as a legal document, but as a moral document or as a focal document, as an inspiration, to do the same with sustainable development. And they adopted the concept of sustainable development goals. I thought immediately, this is great. SDGs, it's pretty much branded on with MDGs. It's a good transition. It's a good follow-up. It's what we need realistically. Because as much as we can fight poverty, if we wreck the planet, the poor are going to be the first to fall back into extreme poverty. That's for sure. Africa is the #1 most vulnerable part of the world to these anthropogenic changes. So the notion of SDGs is, to my mind, a vital handhold that we have before we let everything slip away. And the world, the governments, the 193 member states of the UN, adopted a timetable to negotiate these goals, and we're in the middle of it right now. And it's actually working in a remarkably sensible way, at least for the moment. There have been 10 meetings of 90 governments working in this mass commission called the Open Working Group, and they've been listening to scientists, and they've been listening to engineers, they've been listening to development leaders, talk about what the goals should be and what really the dangers are and what can be accomplished. And last September, they set a timetable that world leaders are to come together in September 2015 to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon asked me in that context, and in a fundamental way, it's what gives me the great fortune to be here today, to help work together with great universities around the world, like Curtin University, to create a worldwide network of problem solving, practical solutions, expertise on actually solving the problems of sustainable development. And this UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN, is taking shape now. I was in China 2 days ago to launch the China chapter of the SDSN. You'll therefore find a powerful partnership in China, centered at Tsinghua University, but engaging great universities across China on these issues. And the hope is, and my belief is, as with Millennium Development Goals, that if knowledge communities come together, make the diagnoses, and help show the actual practical pathways, that we can find a way, a safe passage through this extraordinarily difficult, challenging, and unprecedented time. And again, because we have tools that are more powerful than ever before in human history. So the SDSN has made its own recommendations, and I just offer them to you as an illustration of what the SDGs may turn out to be. We said 10 goals, embracing economic, social, and environmental objectives, ending extreme poverty, sustainable growth within planetary boundaries is the way we put it, using information technology to enable education for all, social inclusion and human rights, including gender equality, universal health coverage, and access to primary health for all, new sustainable agriculture that lifts the heavy environmental footprint of industrial agriculture, sustainable cities, as Perth has demonstrated the capacity to be, sustainable energy, which means a transformation of the energy system to a low-carbon energy system, ending and reversing the 6th great extinction on the planet, and governance for sustainable development. Something like this list will emerge and be adopted next year, something that looks a lot like this list. And again, I think it's important, and again, I'll quote President Kennedy, who, when he was seeking to negotiate the first treaty of peace with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, just months after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and made a remarkable, successful initiative to reach a partial nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union in an environment of mass doubt and skepticism, really defined the idea that I find to be compelling for the Sustainable Development Goals. He said, by defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. It is, I believe, a method of leadership in a world where there aren't very many leaders, after all. Define the goal. Help show that it's manageable. That's where universities come in. Governments cannot do that. They can agree to goals, but they don't know what they're doing. They're not organized for problem solving. These issues are also technical. They're also cross many different scientific, social scientific, and humanistic disciplines. Governments are not arranged for this. Universities have a unique role to play. Not that we're necessarily so good at being practical all the time, but we need to be. That's also a challenge for academia. We need to be helping to solve problems by bringing true knowledge to bear on how to do it. What are strategies for sustainable development? In my view, it starts with goal setting. Then is a process sometimes called backcasting. There's the goal for 2030. There's the goal for 2050. How do we get there? How do we go from that goal back to the present to find a pathway that can take us to where we want to be at the future date? What kind of research and development will be vital to overcome current obstacles, sometimes called technology road mapping? Then is prototyping, getting actual projects on the ground, testing, learning by doing, showing how they can work in practice. Then, of course, is scaling up. PPP, public-private partnerships for mass scaling up of the successful cases. And I believe accelerated mass learning, one of the things that the MOOCs, the online education, makes possible. We can have millions of students from all over the world online studying these fields, learning, whether they're living in remote villages or high in mountains or are too poor to get the education, or there's no education accessible locally. We now have information technology to make this knowledge universally and freely available. So one case quickly, climate change mitigation. We need to change the direction of our greenhouse gas emissions, most importantly CO2. The top line is the path that we're on right now, roughly speaking. It's the path that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has as its scenario, its reference concentration pathway, RCP 8.5. It's a trajectory that will lead us to a warming of the planet of something like 4 to 6 degrees centigrade, completely out of control. And moreover, to an extent that the scientists tell us the feedbacks are so unpredictable that we could set in motion absolutely runaway climate change and climate disruption. The path we need to be on is this downward path, RCP 2.6 as it's called. What the vertical axis is the amount of carbon that we're emitting. Right now we're emitting roughly 10 billion tons of C, of carbon. And that means about 36 billion tons per year of carbon dioxide, given its atomic weight relative to carbon. We need, by the middle of the century, to be at half that level, even as the world economy grows perhaps 3 or 4 times. We have to have the emissions. And if you do the arithmetic, we have the following challenge. We're at 35 billion, 36 billion tons of CO2 and a 7 billion person world economy. We're emitting 5 tons of carbon dioxide on average per person on the planet. Australia and the United States are the 2 largest emitting countries per capita of major economies. We're at 17 tons per capita emissions of CO2. China is at about 8 tons per capita right now. The world, as an average, about 5 tons. By 2050, we need to reduce that emission to about 15 billion tons. But then there will be about 9.6 billion people. That's 1.7 tons per person. That means for the US and Australia to live within that carbon budget, we'd need to reduce by around 90% our emissions. Fortunately, that's our government's plan, right? Right. Every day, they remind us, both of us, and Canada, by the way. Prime Minister Harper loves this too. So the fact of the matter is we have an incredible amount of work to do. And we're not even trying yet, after all. But we have committed to reach a new agreement by December 2015. And if our governments understood that there are technological options that are real, that are within reach, that could dramatically transform the carbon landscape, but at the same time improve the quality of life, maybe they would go with it. They will not come up with it. We need to come up with it. We need to show that this transformation is manageable. It's not good enough, by the way, to say we need a carbon tax or we need a permit system. We know that the political process won't hold on to that, because that's not a future. That's a tool. That's a trick. That's a gimmick. That's not a plan. It may be part of a plan, but we don't have the plan yet. We need a strategy, not just a tool. And nobody's come up with that yet, because that requires more work, by the way. That requires really laying out carefully Australia's energy future. and its options. It requires weighing nuclear power carefully, by the way, because that probably should be part of the solution. It requires understanding what kind of power grid, what kind of options. And those plans have not been made either in this country or in my country or in most countries of the world. Now, the fact of the matter is that we are way above where we need to be, and Australia can't duck the issue. It's the 8th largest emitting economy in the world, and it is the 4th largest holder of coal reserves in the entire world. So you're inevitably a fundamentally important player in this issue for the future of the planet. There aren't too many, by the way, because while we have 193 countries whose well-being is at stake, only a few are really going to determine the future of the planet in this regard. It's the US, it's the European Union, it's China, it's India, it's Australia, it's Canada, it's Russia, and it's the Gulf countries. And that's 90% of the fossil fuel reserves. That's where the action is. And this is where the decisions need to be taken. And this is where the responsibility needs to be shown. So what's actually needed to achieve a 2 degrees centigrade limit, the promised safety zone to keep us from destruction? We need a massive transformation of our energy system, starting with low-carbon electricity, whether it's renewables or nuclear or carbon capture and sequestration, which is a promising but unproven technology at scale. It's proven at small scale. It's completely unproven at large scale. Could we safely store billions and billions of tons of CO2 per year? We don't know, but we need to find out. We require massive energy efficiency, and there are many pathways to that that are easily identified. And we need to electrify our vehicles because we cannot succeed with the internal combustion engine. There are just too many cars, and China is filling up too fast with automobiles to go on with the internal combustion engine and stay within the carbon budget. It's not possible. We need biological storage to protect the carbon that's stored in our forests, in the soils, in the savannas of the world, including in this country. We need to phase out coal almost entirely, except if it's combined with carbon capture and sequestration. And we need a moratorium on exploration and development of unconventional oil, like Canada's oil sands, unless carbon capture and sequestration permit it. All of this is tough, and we are not at all taking this seriously yet. And one of the things I'm proposing is massive global cooperation on research and development around key areas. And I'm really suggesting that Australia take a lead on carbon capture and sequestration and get together the other major coal economies of the world. That's the US, Canada, China, and India. Russia is also, but it doesn't touch its coal for the moment. I don't want to disturb that. Don't give any ideas. Mr. Putin's preoccupied with seizing territory for new oil and gas reserves, I'm afraid. Extremely dangerous. But Australia should mobilize the world's coal-producing countries. It is your future if you want coal to be part of your future. If you want it to be part of the future of the world economy and your own economy, it will not be if there is not carbon capture and sequestration. The world will not have it. Even though it might seem the world doesn't care right now, believe me, it's going to care. It's going to care a lot. And I'd advise this country, for the sake of the world and for the sake of Australia, get on this case to prove that coal can be used safely with advanced technologies, or find out that it can't be, in which case we really need to do things very differently. But we need these technology global cooperative roadmaps and demonstration programs. That's probably a $20 billion project over the next 8 to 10 years. Maybe half can come from industry, the other half from governments. It's a pretty small amount, by the way, for macroeconomists. And I'll tell you the truth, 25 hedge fund managers in New York City took home $21 billion in personal paychecks this past year. And the two of the top three are crooks. That's how weird the world is. So when we say 20 billion and your prime minister says, how could we afford that? Are we really going to lose the world on these decimal points, tiny numbers, and not find out what we can do? So this is an area where Australia could make an absolutely huge difference. Finally, let me say a word about universities in this. Of course, a lot has been said, and I don't have to belabor the point. Universities have a unique role to play. They are repositories of technical knowledge. They are institutions that look ahead. They're institutions that are long-lived and have the capacity to think about the future and the assignment to think about the future. Fortunately, while we are partly commercial and partly commercialized, we have drawn some limits at least to keep the commercial short-termism a bit at bay. And so I believe that universities have a unique responsibility and a unique role to play. And this field of sustainable development is both about practical problem solving and inventing a new way to teach, see, and research the world. And I saw that Professor Peter Newman in his book had almost exactly the same diagram of overlapping Boolean circles here. We have to learn as specialists of sustainable development to understand the integrated systems, the techno-economic systems, the technological bases of the world economy, the physical earth systems, the geopolitical systems, and the social dynamics. It's a different kind of learning, a different kind of training, a different kind of expertise. It's not found in an economics department. It's not found in a climate science department. It's a new integrated, nonlinear systems dynamics that needs to be taught in a new intellectual approach. And it has to operate in real time, facing the real issues and the real challenges. Global scale production systems, the computational revolution, massive demographic change, geopolitical upheaval, and of course the mega environmental disruption. This is the field that universities need to create. And finally, like it or not, this is it. It's not in the newspapers necessarily, it's not in the political speeches yet, but every young person senses this is the reality. This is the challenge of this generation. That's why all over the world, young people are demanding to be able to study and master skills in this area. Put up a sustainability or sustainable development program, and hundreds or thousands of young people will come to apply, because this is the future, and young people at least know it. And finally, I'll end with one more bit of wisdom of President Kennedy. You know, he was a great goal setter, and one of the most remarkable and inspiring goals that he set in his brief time as president that changed the world was the goal to go to the moon. And it's quite a remarkable phenomenon, by the way. He stood in Congress in March 1961 and said, and challenged America, let us go to the moon, put a man to the moon, and bring him back safely to Earth before the end of the decade. Unbelievable. There were no plans to do it yet. It took NASA a year and a half after that call to determine a strategy. Quite remarkable. No political leaders, surrounded as they are by swarms of political advisors, would ever be allowed to make such a statement today. They told, oh, you can't do that. Check out the focus groups. That's not proved. We're not allowed to dream. We're not allowed to say these things. But President Kennedy stood there and said, before the end of the decade, which of course was achieved in 1969. And when he was asked about it, he made one of the most remarkable speeches of his life. You can watch it online, the speech that he gave at Rice University in 1962. And he made this wonderful statement that I'll close with. He said, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too. It's our turn to win the challenge of sustainable development. Thank you very much, Curtin University.
Well, it was worth coming, and I believe we've heard the call to arms. Curtin will be certainly doing our bit, and we now are linked in this UN Sustainable Development Support Network. We're off to Melbourne tonight to pursue it on a global scale. We have a new doctorate in sustainable development which we are launching, and which we want to make part of that whole network around the world, and it will be managed through Curtin. That's going to be... Okay. But mostly, bravo to our man from Columbia University. We've got a gift for him, which I'm sure he'll be really pleased to put into his bag. It's an Akubra hat. Now, we'll send it to New York for you. So, but let me at least give it to you. There you go. And please now go down and have a look at the showcase, down the stairs to the left there, and we will have to head off to the airport. So thank you very much.